The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers opened with a deep rumble that echoed through the crystalline halls of Nexus Prime. Ambassador Jake Morrison stepped through the entrance, his dark suit a stark contrast against the flowing robes and exotic forms of the alien delegates who filled the amphitheater. Behind him walked Dr. Lisa Hayes, her arms full of data tablets and holographic projectors, her face set with grim determination. Jake had served as Earth's representative to the Council for 8 years now. He had seen the politics, the endless debates, the careful dance of diplomacy between hundreds of different species, but today felt different. Today carried the weight of finality. The amphitheater buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages. The tall, elegant Zephyrians clustered near the center, their blue-scaled faces animated with discussion. The crystalline, Helix representatives stood in perfect geometric formations, their bodies catching and refracting the chamber's soft light into rainbow patterns across the walls. Scattered throughout were representatives from hundreds of other worlds, each delegation marking their territory with familiar precision. Chancellor Vextar of the Zephyrian Union called for order with 3 sharp strikes of his ceremonial staff. The sound rang out across the chamber like a bell, and gradually the chatter died away. Jake felt the weight of nearly 1,000 alien eyes turning toward him as he walked down the long aisle to the speaker's platform. The Council recognizes Ambassador Morrison of the human delegation, Vexatar announced, his voice carrying the slight hiss that marked his species. "The floor is yours, Ambassador." Jake stepped up to the platform and activated the holographic projector. Immediately, the space above the amphitheater filled with a 3-dimensional map of their galaxy. Bright points of light marked inhabited systems, while darker regions showed the vast emptiness between the spiral arms. "Honored delegates," Jake began, his voice calm and steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to present. "For the past 3 years, humanity has been tracking an anomaly approaching our galaxy from the void between star clusters. We have designated this phenomenon the Void Swarm." The map above shifted, showing the outer edge of the galaxy. A dark mass appeared at the rim, its boundaries unclear, but its movement unmistakable. It was approaching their home at an ever-increasing speed. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Jake could see some delegates leaning forward with interest, while others seemed dismissive. The Helix Collective pulsed with synchronized light patterns that he knew indicated skepticism. "Our analysis indicates that this entity has already consumed at least 3 smaller galaxy clusters in its path," Jake continued. "Each time it encounters a cluster, it grows larger and moves faster. The pattern suggests it feeds on the energy signatures of living civilizations." Dr. Hayes stepped forward and activated her own projector. New images filled the air above them, showing spectral analyses and energy readings that had taken humanity's best scientists years to compile. The data was overwhelming in its implications. "The swarm's composition defies conventional physics," Lisa explained, her voice carrying the authority of decades of research. "It exists partially in normal space and partially in what we can only describe as a parallel dimension. This dual existence makes it immune to most conventional weapons and allows it to drain energy directly from living organisms." Chancellor Vexatar raised one clawed hand. "Dr. Hayes, these are extraordinary claims. What evidence do you have that this supposed threat is real and not merely human paranoia?" Jake felt a familiar frustration building in his chest. For 3 years they had presented evidence, shared data, offered their research freely to any council member who would listen. Each time they had been met with polite dismissal or outright mockery. "Chancellor, our deep space monitoring stations have recorded the disappearance of over 40 star systems along the entity's projected path," Jake replied. "We have captured electromagnetic signatures consistent with massive energy absorption. We have even detected what appear to be distress calls from civilizations that no longer exist." The chamber erupted in debate. Representatives shouted questions and objections in their native languages while translation devices struggled to keep up. The noise was deafening. From his seat near the back of the chamber, Keeper Thalos of the Sanctuary Worlds stood slowly. The ancient being's presence commanded respect, even among the most arrogant delegates, and gradually the chamber fell quiet again. "I have reviewed the human data," Thalos said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow audible throughout the chamber. "Their methodology is sound. Their conclusions are terrifying but logical. I believe we should heed their warnings." Chancellor Vextar's expression shifted to one of barely concealed irritation. "Keeper Thalos, with respect to your age and wisdom, humanity has a history of seeing threats where none exist. They are a young species, prone to fear and aggression. Their data is likely contaminated by their own primitive anxieties." Jake felt his hands clench into fists at his sides. Primitive. After humanity had shared fusion technology, medical breakthroughs, and agricultural advances that had benefited dozens of council worlds, they were still dismissed as primitive. "If I may," Jake said, stepping forward again. "Humanity proposes the formation of a joint defense initiative. We are willing to share our research on the swarm's weaknesses, our defensive technologies, and our evacuation protocols. Working together, we believe the approaching threat can be neutralized or at least redirected away from populated systems." The Helix Collective pulsed in unison, their crystalline forms creating a cascade of dismissive light patterns. Their speaker, a tall formation of interlocked crystals that called itself Resonance Prime, began to emit the harmonic tones that served as their language. The Helix Collective finds human proposals to be based on insufficient data and clouded by emotional responses, the translation system announced. "We do not accept the premise that this alleged threat requires council attention or resources." More voices joined the opposition. The warrior caste Imperium questioned humanity's military competence. The Trade Federation worried about the economic implications of preparing for a threat that might not exist. The Academic Assembly demanded more peer review of the human data before any action could be considered. Jake watched it all with growing despair. He had known this moment would come, but seeing it unfold still felt like a punch to the gut. Dr. Hayes stood beside him, her face pale but determined as delegate after delegate dismissed their warnings. Finally, Chancellor Vextar called for order again. "The Council will now vote on the human proposal to establish a joint defense initiative against their alleged void swarm. All in favor?" Jake held his breath as the voting began. Electronic tallies appeared on screens throughout the chamber. One vote appeared immediately, Keeper Thalos casting his support for humanity's proposal. Then nothing. Long seconds passed in silence. "All opposed?" The chamber lit up with hundreds of responses. The final tally appeared on the main screen. 847 votes against, 1 vote in favor. The proposal had failed by the largest margin in council history. Jake felt something inside him break. Not just disappointment, but a fundamental shift in how he viewed the galaxy and humanity's place in it. For 8 years, he had believed in the Council's mission of unity and cooperation. In this moment, he realized that unity only existed when it served the interests of the powerful. He walked slowly back to the platform and began gathering his materials. Dr. Hayes helped him pack away the projectors and data tablets that contained years of research and desperate warnings. The chamber had returned to its normal buzz of conversation, delegates already moving on to other business as if humanity's warning had never been delivered. When everything was packed, Jake turned to face the chamber one final time. His voice carried clearly across the amphitheater, cutting through the casual chatter. "For 8 years, I have served as Earth's voice in these chambers. I have watched this council make decisions that affected billions of lives across hundreds of worlds. Today, I have seen this body choose willful ignorance over survival itself." The chamber began to quiet as delegates realized something significant was happening. Humanity offered our friendship, our knowledge, and our strength to help face a threat that could destroy us all. You have chosen pride over preparation, politics over survival. This council has shown that it values the comfort of denial more than the safety of its citizens. Jake paused, looking around the chamber at faces that had become familiar over the years. Some showed curiosity, others annoyance, but most displayed the same indifference that had greeted humanity's warnings. Effective immediately, humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council. We will no longer participate in debates where reason is shouted down by arrogance. We will no longer offer our resources to those who view generosity as weakness. He picked up his briefcase and began walking toward the exit. Dr. Hayes fell into step beside him, her head held high despite the magnitude of what they were abandoning. "We go to prepare for what is coming," Jake called over his shoulder. "When the darkness arrives at your doorstep, remember that we tried to light the way. May you find wisdom before it becomes too late." The massive doors closed behind them with the same deep rumble that had announced their heir. 6 months had passed since the human delegation walked out of the council chambers, and the galaxy was beginning to feel their absence in ways no one had expected. Captain Neil Brooks stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Horizon, watching, as the last transport ships loaded with human colonists prepared to depart from New Terra Station. The station had been humanity's pride for 30 years, a massive orbital complex that housed over 2 million people and served as the primary trade hub for 3 sectors. Now it stood nearly empty, its corridors echoing with the footsteps of the few humans who remained to oversee the final evacuation procedures. Neil had commanded exploration missions for 15 years, mapping uncharted systems and making first contact with dozens of species. He had always believed that humanity's future lay in cooperation with their alien neighbors. But the Council's dismissal of the swarm threat had changed everything. Project Sanctuary, humanity's most ambitious undertaking, had begun the day after. Ambassador Morrison's final speech. "Captain, the last civilian transport is requesting clearance for departure," reported Lieutenant Amy Chen from her station. Her voice carried the same mixture of sadness and determination that had become common among the human crews managing the Exodus. "Granted," Neil replied. "Signal all ships in the convoy. We begin the final phase in 12 hours. Through the view screen, Neil could see the massive fleet that had assembled around New Terra. Hundreds of ships of every size and configuration floated in careful formation. Cargo vessels carried the machinery and equipment needed to build new worlds. Colony ships held millions of humans who had chosen to trust their government's warnings about the coming danger. And scattered throughout were the ships of other species, those few civilizations that had listened to humanity's message and decided to join the Exodus. The bridge doors opened and Commander Sarah Blake walked in, her uniform showing the signs of weeks spent overseeing the systematic dismantling of human installations. Sarah had been in charge of ensuring that no human technology would fall into the wrong hands when they left. It was a massive undertaking that required precision and absolute secrecy. "Status report, Commander," Neil said. "All critical systems have been removed or destroyed," Sarah replied, consulting her tablet. "The Willow folk have completed loading their generational ships. The Hive Collective finished transferring their queen larvae yesterday. We're still waiting on the final peaceful one's transport, but they should be ready within the hour." Neil nodded. It had been surprising how many species had quietly approached human representatives in the months following the council vote. The Willow folk, a gentle race of plant-like beings, had been the first to ask for inclusion in humanity's evacuation plans. They had seen the data about the swarm and understood that their pacifist nature would make them easy targets. The Hive Collective, despite their fearsome appearance, were actually highly advanced engineers who had recognized the validity of human science. Dozens of smaller civilizations had followed, each bringing their own skills and knowledge to the growing alliance. "What about the monitoring stations?" Neil asked. "That's the interesting part," Sarah replied, a slight smile crossing her face. The Council's intelligence services have been trying to track our movements for months. They've managed to follow some of our supply convoys as far as the outer spiral, but then the trails go cold. Admiral Fisher's people have done an excellent job creating false signals and decoy routes. Neil felt a surge of pride at the mention of Admiral Roy Fisher. The veteran commander had been put in charge of the overall evacuation, and his strategic brilliance had made it possible to move billions of people without the Council discovering their true destination. The operation was so complex that even Neil didn't know where they were ultimately headed. All he knew was that when his part of the fleet reached the rendezvous point, they would receive final coordinates that would take them beyond the galactic rim. "Sir," Amy called from her station, "I'm receiving a priority transmission from Zephyrian Intelligence Command. They're demanding information about human fleet movements." Neil walked over to her station and read the message on her screen. Chancellor Vextar himself had signed the transmission, demanding that humanity share their evacuation routes and final destinations under the terms of various trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. "Send a reply," Neil said. "Tell them that all such agreements were voided when humanity withdrew from the Council. Our movements are no longer their concern." As Amy worked on the transmission, Sarah moved closer to Neil. "Captain, are you sure we're doing the right thing, leaving everything behind, abandoning worlds that humans have called home for generations?" Neil had asked himself the same question every day for the past 6 months. The answer never changed. "Sarah, I've read the classified reports about the swarm. I've seen Dr. Hayes's projections about what happens to civilizations that try to fight it without preparation. We offered to help them prepare. They chose to ignore us. Now we choose to survive." The view screen flickered and a new image appeared. Admiral Fisher's weathered face filled the display, his gray hair and lined features showing the strain of coordinating the largest evacuation in galactic history. Behind him, Neil could see the bridge of the command ship Unity, bustling with activity. "All convoy commanders, this is Admiral Fisher with final instructions," the Admiral began. "In 6 hours, you will receive navigation data for the next phase of our journey. From this point forward, we maintain complete communications silence, except for emergency protocols. The routes you will follow have been prepared for over a year. Trust your navigation computers and trust your crews." The Admiral paused, his expression growing more serious. "I want every person in this fleet to understand what we are leaving behind. These are the worlds where humanity grew up, where we learned to reach for the stars, where we built our first alliances with other species. We are not abandoning our heritage, we are preserving it for the future." Another pause, and when Fisher continued, his voice carried absolute conviction. "The Council believes we are running away in fear. They are wrong. We are making the hard choice that leadership requires. When the time comes, history will show that we were not cowards but pioneers. We go not in defeat, but in hope." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in thoughtful silence. Neil could see his crew processing the Admiral's words, each of them wrestling with their own doubts and hopes about the journey ahead. "Captain," Amy said quietly, "the Peaceful One's transport is signaling ready for departure. All ships in the convoy are now in position." Neil took a deep breath and settled into his command chair. Around New Terra Station, the massive fleet began to move with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance. Ships fell into formation, their engines creating a constellation of blue-white stars against the darkness of space. "Signal the fleet," Neil commanded. "All ships, prepare for hyperspace jump on my mark. Navigation officers, engage final destination protocols." As the countdown began, Neil thought about the intelligence reports Sarah had mentioned. The Council was indeed trying to track human movements, but they were looking in the wrong places. While official attention focused on the obvious evacuation, routes toward the outer rim, the real fleet was taking a much longer and more secretive path. Humanity had spent decades mapping the dark spaces between spiral arms, finding routes that no other species had ever explored. "Jump in 10 seconds, Amy announced. Neil watched the view screen as New Terra Station fell away behind them. The massive complex that had been humanity's symbol of growth and prosperity now stood empty, its lights beginning to dim as automated systems shut down non-essential functions. In a few weeks, other species would probably move in to claim the valuable real estate, never knowing that they were inheriting a trap. Sarah had been very thorough in her preparations. Every human facility left behind contained hidden monitoring, systems that would provide early warning when the swarm arrived. The Council would eventually learn that humanity's warnings had been accurate, but by then it would be too late for them to follow the evacuation routes. "Jump initiated," Amy called. Out. The stars stretched into lines of light as the hyperspace engines engaged. When the distortion cleared, they were in a system that appeared on no Council charts, moving toward a rendezvous point that existed only in the carefully guarded databases of Project Sanctuary. Behind them, the galaxy continued its ancient rotation, unaware that humanity had just taken the first step on a journey that would carry them beyond the reach of coming darkness. The Council chambers on Nexus Prime still echoed with debates about trade regulations and territorial disputes, while the entity they had dismissed as human paranoia crept ever closer to the outer rim. Neil settled back in his chair and prepared for the long journey ahead. Somewhere beyond the galactic edge, Admiral Fisher was leading the construction of new worlds where humanity and their allies could rebuild and thrive. The exodus had begun, and there would be no turning back. 2 years had passed since the great human exodus, and the Galactic Council had settled into a comfortable routine of dismissing humanity's warnings as the paranoid fantasies of a primitive species. Chancellor Vexitar stood before the assembled delegates in the same chamber where Ambassador Morrison had made his final plea, addressing concerns about human trade routes that had mysteriously gone silent. The economic disruption caused by humanity's dramatic withdrawal continues to affect several sectors, Vexitar announced to the gathered representatives. However, our analysts believe we can compensate for the loss of human agricultural and industrial output within the next fiscal cycle. The delegates nodded approvingly. The Helix Collective had already moved to claim several former human colonies, while the Trade Federation was busy establishing new shipping lanes to replace the ones humanity had abandoned. Life in the galaxy continued much as it always had, with endless debates about territorial boundaries and resource allocation. That illusion of normalcy shattered when the first distress signals arrived. The emergency session was called at Aero 347 Galactic Standard Time, rousing delegates from their sleep across Nexus Prime. The Council chambers filled with confused and irritated representatives who had no idea why they were being summoned in the middle of the night cycle. General Zishoth of the warrior caste Imperium stood at the central podium, his 4 arms gesturing at the holographic display above the chamber. The display showed the outer rim of the galaxy, where 3 Helix colony worlds had gone completely silent within a 6-hour period. At 2130 hours, we lost all communication with Crystal Falls, Zoth reported, his voice carrying the controlled tension of a career military officer facing the unknown. At 2256 hours, Harmony Station stopped transmitting. At Aero 142 hours, New Prism went dark. Resonance Prime, the Helix Collective's primary representative, pulsed with rapid light patterns that the translation systems interpreted as extreme agitation. "This is impossible," the harmonic voice announced. "Our colonies maintain constant subspace communication. There is no known phenomenon that could cause simultaneous system failures across 3 separate worlds." Chancellor Vexitar raised his staff for order, but the chamber erupted in speculation and debate. Some delegates suggested equipment malfunction, others proposed sabotage by rogue elements. A few mentioned solar flares or other natural phenomena, but none of the explanations satisfied anyone. "General Zhoth, what do our long-range sensors show?" Vexitar asked when the noise finally subsided. The holographic display shifted, showing detailed scans of the affected systems. Where thriving colonies should have appeared, the sensors detected only empty space and scattered debris. The energy signatures that should have marked inhabited worlds were gone, replaced by vast areas of what could only be described as absolute darkness. Our deep space monitoring network detected massive energy fluctuations in each system immediately before communications ceased, Zixoth continued. The pattern suggests some form of coordinated attack, but we have no evidence of hostile fleet movements in those sectors. From the back of the chamber, a single voice cut through the growing panic. Dr. Maya Collins stepped forward from the observers' gallery, her human features immediately recognizable to delegates who remembered the exodus 2 years earlier. "You have evidence," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly across the stunned chamber. "You've had evidence for over 5 years. You simply chose to ignore it." Chancellor Vextar's scaled face flushed with anger. "Dr. Collins, you have no authority to address this council. Security, escort this human from the chamber." "Wait," Keeper Thalos said, rising slowly from his seat. The ancient being's voice commanded instant attention. "Let her speak. The timing of her presence here is too convenient to be coincidence." Maya walked down the aisle toward the central platform, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. She had remained behind when her people departed, hidden on a remote research station where she had continued monitoring the approaching threat. For 2 years, she had watched and waited, hoping that the Council would come to its senses before it was too late. "The attacks on the Helix colonies match exactly the patterns we warned you about," Maya said, activating her own holographic projector. The display above the chamber changed, showing the data that humanity had tried to present years earlier. The energy drain, the complete absence of life signs, the way entire populations simply vanish without a trace. She manipulated the display, overlaying the recent attack patterns with the projections from human research. The match was perfect, down to the smallest detail. "This is the Void Swarm," Maya continued. "It has finally reached our galaxy, exactly as we predicted. The 3 colonies you lost were just the beginning. According to our calculations, it will consume everything in the outer rim within 6 months, then move toward the core systems." General Zoth stepped forward, his warrior instincts overriding political considerations. "Dr. Collins, assuming your analysis is correct, what can we expect from this entity? How do we fight it?" Maya's expression grew grim. "General, your traditional military doctrine is useless against this threat. The swarm exists partially outside normal space-time. It feeds on the life energy of entire civilizations. Your weapons will pass right through it, while it drains the power from your ships and the life from your crews." The chamber erupted in protests and questions, but Maya continued over the noise. "We tried to warn you about this. We offered to share our defensive technologies, our evacuation protocols, our research into the swarm's weaknesses. You dismissed us as primitive and paranoid." Chancellor Vexatar slammed his staff against the podium repeatedly, trying to restore order. When the chamber finally quieted, his voice carried a mixture of anger and desperation. "Dr. Collins, if humanity possessed effective countermeasures against this threat, why did they not share them with the Council?" "They tried," Maya replied simply. "Ambassador Morrison stood in this very chamber and offered everything. You voted 847 to 1 against even considering the threat real." She paused, letting the weight of that failure sink into the minds of every delegate present. "My people spent 3 years trying to convince you to work together. When you refused, they made the only logical choice. They left." The silence stretched for long moments before Keeper Thalos spoke again. "Dr. Collins, in your professional opinion, what are the chances that this council can mount an effective defense against the swarm without human assistance?" Maya's answer was brutally honest. 0. You lack the specialized weapons needed to damage an entity that exists in multiple dimensions. You lack the shielding technology to protect your ships from energy drain. Most importantly, you lack the unity necessary to coordinate a galaxy-wide defense. General Zoth's 4 arms crossed over his chest in a gesture of grim acceptance. Then we are defeated before we even begin to fight. Not necessarily, Maya said. There is still one option available. The chamber leaned forward collectively, desperate for any hope she might offer. 3 days ago, I received a transmission from the human fleet beyond the galactic rim, Maya continued. They are aware of the swarm's arrival. Despite everything that has happened, they are still willing to help. Chancellor Vextar's voice carried a mixture of hope and suspicion. What are their terms? Maya smiled sadly. No terms, Chancellor. They simply ask that any ships capable of reaching the coordinates they provide be prepared to work as equals, not as superiors demanding service. She activated her projector one final time, displaying a star chart that showed a route beyond, the galactic edge. The path was complex and dangerous, requiring precise navigation through dark matter fields and gravitational anomalies that few Council species had ever attempted to cross. The route will take approximately 4 months for most Council ships, Maya explained. But you need to understand something important. This is not a rescue mission. This is humanity offering sanctuary to those wise enough to accept it. General A. Zoth studied the star chart intently. Dr. Collins, how many ships could realistically make this journey? With current Council technology, maybe 10% of your total fleet capacity, Maya replied. The rest would be lost in the dark matter. Storms or gravitational shears along the route. The implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. Even if they accepted humanity's offer, most of the galaxy's population would be left behind to face the swarm alone. Ambassador Chen Wei, another human who had remained to observe the Council's final days, stood up from the diplomatic gallery. His presence had gone largely unnoticed until now, but his voice carried the authority of someone who had witnessed the full scope of the approaching disaster. The transmission also contained a warning, Chen said quietly. The swarm's advanced scouts have already begun probing the mid-rim systems. You have perhaps 2 weeks before the main force arrives. After that, even the evacuation route may become impassable. The chamber fell into stunned silence as the reality of their situation finally became clear. The threat they had dismissed as human paranoia was real. It was here, and they were completely unprepared to face it. The species that had tried to save them was gone, leaving behind only a desperate lifeline for those few who might still escape. Chancellor Vextar looked around the chamber at faces that showed growing panic. The evacuation ships launched from Nexus Prime under cover of darkness, their engines creating brief streaks of light against the star-filled void before disappearing into hyperspace. Only 23 vessels had been deemed capable of making the dangerous journey to humanity's sanctuary, carrying perhaps 50,000 survivors from civilizations that had once numbered in the billions. Keeper Thalos stood in the observation deck of the research vessel Seeker, watching the last transport disappear into the dimensional fold. His ancient body felt every one of his 800 years as he contemplated the magnitude of what they were leaving behind. The sanctuary worlds had chosen to send their most precious archives and youngest citizens, trusting that knowledge, and youth might survive even if their homeworlds did not. 3 months into their journey along the treacherous route beyond the galactic rim, the survivors had begun to understand the true scope of humanity's preparation. The path they followed was not just a navigation route, but an engineering marvel, with hidden supply depots and emergency shelters placed at precise intervals along the way. Humanity had spent decades preparing this escape route, mapping gravitational anomalies and dark matter streams that other species had never even detected. Dr. Maya Collins worked tirelessly in the Seeker's main laboratory, analyzing the data streams that continued to arrive from the automated monitoring systems humanity had left behind in Council space. Each report painted a more horrifying picture than the last. The swarm had consumed 47 star systems. In the past month alone, its advance accelerating as it absorbed the energy and knowledge of each conquered civilization. The pattern is becoming clearer, Maya announced to the small group of survivors who had gathered for the daily briefing. The swarm doesn't just destroy civilizations randomly, it learns from them, incorporates their knowledge, becomes more efficient with each conquest. Admiral Corex of the remaining Zephyrian fleet studied the holographic displays with professional interest. His people had lost everything, but his military mind still functioned with analytical precision. Dr. Collins, are you suggesting that this entity becomes more dangerous as it feeds? Exactly, Maya replied. Our analysis shows that its early attacks were relatively crude, simply overwhelming planetary defenses through brute force. But look at the recent data. The attacks on the Helix Core world show tactical sophistication that matches their own military doctrine. It learned their strategies by consuming their commanders. Keeper Thalos felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Then every victory it achieves makes it stronger for the next battle. Maya nodded grimly. Which is why humanity's evacuation strategy was the only logical response. You cannot defeat an enemy that becomes more powerful with every engagement. You can only avoid it or redirect it. As the small fleet continued its journey through the dark spaces between galaxies, Maya began sharing more details about humanity's research into the swarm. The classified files she had brought contained decades of theoretical work, including detailed studies of similar entities that had been detected in other galaxy clusters. The most important discovery came from Dr. Alan Rodriguez, Maya explained, projecting the image of a middle-aged human scientist onto the conference room screen. He theorized that the swarm's dual-dimensional existence made it vulnerable to specific types of harmonic resonance. Weapons that could match its energy frequency might actually be able to damage it. Admiral Corex leaned forward with interest. Did humanity develop such weapons? They tried, Maya answered, but the energy requirements were enormous, and the weapons had to be precisely calibrated for each individual swarm entity. It would have required the combined industrial output of dozens of worlds to build enough harmonic disruptors to make a meaningful difference. She paused, manipulating the display to show technical schematics that hurt to look at directly. More importantly, Dr. Rodriguez calculated that deploying such weapons effectively would require perfect coordination between hundreds of different species. Every ship would need to fire at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right frequency. For the resonance cascade to work, the implications were staggering. Even if the Council had listened to humanity's warnings, even if they had worked together to build the necessary weapons, success would have required a level of unity and trust that the galaxy had never achieved. There was another option, Maya continued. Complete evacuation to a safe distance, followed by what Dr. Rodriguez called a galactic firebreak. If you could drain enough energy from the galaxy's outer regions, the swarm might lose interest and move on to a more energy-rich target. Keeper Thalos understood immediately. You would sacrifice the rim worlds to save the core systems. Or sacrifice everything to save everyone, Maya corrected. The plan called for the systematic evacuation of the entire galaxy over a 50-year period. Every living being relocated to prepared sanctuary worlds beyond the galactic edge. When the swarm arrived, it would find empty systems and no energy sources to sustain itself. Admiral Corex shook his head in amazement. The logistics alone would be impossible. Moving trillions of beings across interstellar distances, establishing new colonies in uncharted space. Humanity had been working on the preliminary phases. For 20 years, Maya said. Project Sanctuary was originally designed as a galactic evacuation program. When the Council refused to participate, they scaled it down to save whoever was willing to trust them. The conference room fell silent as the survivors contemplated what might have been. If the Council had listened, if they had worked together, the approaching catastrophe might have been prevented or at least mitigated. Instead, they were fleeing with a handful of survivors while their homeworlds burned behind them. A communication alert interrupted their thoughts. The ship's navigation officer announced that they were approaching the final waypoint before their destination. Through the observation ports, they could see something that defied belief. A massive structure hung in the void beyond the galactic rim, its size dwarfing anything the survivors had ever imagined. The construction was clearly artificial, with geometric patterns that suggested both human engineering and the architectural styles of dozens of other species. Lights moved across its surface in complex patterns, and ships of unfamiliar design moved between docking ports that could accommodate vessels of every size and configuration. "Welcome to Sanctuary Station," came a transmission from the massive structure. The voice belonged to President Bill Carter, the elected leader of the Human Coalition. "We have been expecting you." As their small fleet approached the station, more details became visible. The structure was not just a single massive habitat, but a complex network of interconnected modules, each one designed to accommodate different species' environmental needs. Gardens, visible through transparent sections, showed familiar plants from dozens of different homeworlds, while manufacturing areas hummed with activity that suggested a thriving industrial base. "How long have you been building this?" Admiral Corex asked during the docking procedures. The answer came from Admiral Roy Fisher, whose weathered face appeared on their communication screen. "Construction began 8 years ago when it became clear that the Council would not accept our warnings. We knew that someone would eventually need sanctuary, so we prepared one." As the survivors disembarked and began their orientation to Sanctuary Station, they discovered the true scope of humanity's achievement. The station housed over 2 billion beings from hundreds of different species, all working together in a level of cooperation that had never existed in the old galaxy. The Willow folk had contributed their mastery of biological systems, creating atmospheric processors that could terraform entire worlds in decades instead of centuries. The Hive Collective had shared their engineering expertise, allowing for construction projects on a scale that individual species could never achieve. Dozens of smaller civilizations had brought their own unique knowledge and skills to the growing alliance. "This is what we offered the Council," President Carter explained during the welcome ceremony. "Not human dominance, but true cooperation. Not the rule of the strong over the weak, but partnership between equals." Maya stood with the other survivors in the Great Assembly Hall, watching as representatives from species she had never seen before worked alongside familiar faces from the old galaxy. Children played together in gardens that mixed plant life from 100 different worlds, while their parents collaborated on projects that would benefit everyone. Outside the great transparisteel windows, work continued on additional modules that would house the refugees still making their way along the evacuation route. In the distance, the skeletal framework of new habitats rose against the starfield, each one designed to accommodate more survivors from the dying galaxy. The swarm continued its relentless advance through Council space, but here in the darkness, between galaxies, life had found a way to continue. Humanity had kept their promise, offering sanctuary to all who were wise enough to accept it. For the first time in months, Keeper Thalos allowed himself to hope that some small part of their civilization might survive the coming darkness. The emergency bunker beneath Nexus Prime shook with each distant explosion as the Void Swarm's final assault began on the galactic core. Commander Kate Sullivan sat at the communications console, her human features stark in the red emergency lighting that had become their only source of illumination. Around her, the last 23 council members huddled in the reinforced chamber that had once been reserved for the most classified military briefings. 6 months had passed since the evacuation ships departed for humanity's sanctuary, and the swarm had consumed everything in its path with terrifying efficiency. The outer rim was gone, the mid-spiral territories had fallen in weeks, and now the ancient heart of galactic civilization was dying above their heads. The proud chambers where 1,000 species had once debated the fate of worlds now stood empty, their crystal spires cracking under the assault of an entity that fed on the very essence of life. Chancellor Vextar had not spoken in 3 days, his scaled form hunched in the corner, where he stared at displays showing the systematic destruction of everything he had spent his life defending. The Trade Federation representatives clutched their economic data tablets as if numbers and projections could somehow protect them from the reality unfolding above. General Zixoth maintained his military bearing, but his 4 arms hung uselessly at his sides, no longer having any forces to command. Kate had volunteered to remain behind when the evacuation began, serving as humanity's final observer in Council Space. Her official role was to maintain communications with any survivors and coordinate rescue efforts, but everyone understood her real purpose. She was there to witness the end, to record the final moments of civilizations that had chosen pride over survival. The communication panel chimed with an incoming transmission, its frequency matching the encrypted channels that humanity used for long-range communication. Kate activated the system, and Admiral Roy Fisher's face appeared on the screen, his expression grave but determined. "Commander Sullivan, we're receiving your emergency beacon," Fisher said, his voice slightly distorted by the massive distance the signal had traveled. "Status report." Kate glanced around the bunker at the defeated representatives of species that had once ruled hundreds of worlds. "Admiral, surface communications went dark 48 hours ago. Orbital defenses fell this morning. The Swarm has complete control of Nexus Prime and is systematically draining all energy sources on the planet." She paused, checking her instruments. "Bunker power is holding for now, but our shielding won't last more than another 72 hours. After that, the Swarm will detect our life signs." Fisher nodded slowly. "Understood, Commander. I have someone here who wants to speak with the Council survivors." The image shifted and President Bill Carter appeared on screen. Behind him, Kate could see the bustling activity of Sanctuary Station's command center, where humans and aliens worked side by side, monitoring the situation in their former home galaxy. "Council members," Carter began, his voice carrying both sadness and resolve. "I know that many of you blame humanity for abandoning you in your hour of need. I want you to understand that we never abandoned you. We tried to save you, and when you refused our help, we prepared a place where you could still find safety." Keeper Thalos looked up from his meditation corner, his ancient eyes focusing on the screen with difficulty. "President Carter, we have learned much about wisdom and folly in these final days. If any of us survive to reach your sanctuary, we will come not as rulers demanding recognition, but as students seeking to learn." Carter's expression softened. "Keeper Thalos, you were the only one who supported our warnings in the Council. Vote. You and your people will always be welcome in our new home, not as students but as respected elders whose wisdom we value." The transmission flickered as another massive energy discharge shook the bunker. Kate quickly adjusted the communication array to maintain the connection. "Sir, the Swarm is intensifying its attack. I estimate we have perhaps 24 hours before it breaches our defenses. Commander, we have a rescue ship en route to your position," Fisher's voice cut in. "Captain Danny Brooks is commanding a specially modified stealth vessel that should be able to penetrate the Swarm's perimeter. But you need to understand that this is an extremely dangerous mission." Kate felt a surge of hope mixed with realism. "Admiral, with respect, a single ship cannot evacuate 24 people from a planet completely controlled by the Swarm. The entity will detect us the moment we leave the bunker." "Not if we create a sufficient distraction," came a new voice. Captain Brooks appeared on screen, his young face showing the confidence of someone who had spent years learning from humanity's best tactical minds. "Commander, we've been monitoring the Swarm's behavior patterns. It's drawn to large energy sources and tends to ignore smaller signatures when it's feeding." He manipulated controls off-screen, and tactical displays appeared showing Nexus Prime's current status. The planet's surface was covered in a writhing darkness that pulsed with absorbed energy, while the Swarm's main mass continued to drain power from the dying orbital installations. "Our plan is simple," Brooks continued. We detonate the planet's primary fusion reactor, creating an energy surge large enough to draw the swarm's attention to the opposite hemisphere. During the distraction, we extract you from the bunker and make a run for open space. General Joth finally spoke, his military training overriding his despair. Captain, detonating the reactor will destroy what remains of Nexus Prime. This planet has been the center of galactic civilization for 3,000 years. General, the planet is already lost, Brooks replied bluntly. The swarm is systematically draining every power source on the surface. In 6 hours, there won't be enough energy left to sustain any life anyway. We're just accelerating the inevitable to create an opportunity. The bunker shook again, more violently this time. Kate's instruments showed power fluctuations in their shielding grid. Admiral, the decision needs to be made now. Our defenses are failing faster than projected. President Carter reappeared on screen, his face reflecting the weight of the decision they were asking the survivors to make. Council members, I want to be absolutely clear about what we're offering. Our rescue ship can take you to safety, but you will be leaving behind everything your civilization's built. Your homeworlds, your monuments, your history, all of it will be consumed by the swarm. He paused, looking directly into the camera. But if you come with us, you will have the chance to rebuild. Not as the rulers you once were, but as partners in something new. The sanctuary we've built isn't just a refuge. It's the foundation for a different kind of civilization. Chancellor Vextar raised his head for the first time in days. President Carter, what guarantee do we have that humanity will not simply replace the Council as the dominant power in this new alliance? Carter's answer was immediate and absolute. Because we've already proven that we don't want to rule anyone. When we had the chance to claim superiority over species that had dismissed us, we chose to share our sanctuary freely. When we could have demanded tribute or submission, we asked only for cooperation. Another massive explosion shook the bunker, and Kate's power readings dropped significantly. Admiral, if we're doing this, it has to be now. Bunker integrity is down to 60%. All survivors prepare for immediate evacuation, Fisher commanded. Captain Brooks, begin your approach. Commander Sullivan, activate the reactor overload sequence on my mark. Kate's hands moved over the controls, accessing the planetary defense network that still maintained minimal functionality. The fusion reactor that had powered Nexus Prime for centuries could be overloaded remotely, creating an explosion visible from neighboring star systems. Reactor primed for overload, Kate reported. All survivors move to the emergency airlock. Rescue ship. ETA in 4 minutes. As the council members gathered their few remaining possessions and moved toward the evacuation point, Keeper Thalos paused beside Kate's station. Commander, will you record a final message for the archives? Kate nodded and activated the recording system. Thalos looked directly into the camera, his voice carrying the wisdom of centuries and the weight of absolute defeat. Let this be recorded in the archives of whatever civilization survives, he began. The Galactic Council existed for over 4,000 years, governing hundreds of worlds and trillions of beings. In our final hour, we learned that wisdom is not measured by the size of one's empire, but by the willingness to listen to those who offer help. He paused, his ancient eyes reflecting the red emergency lights. Humanity came to us with warnings and offers of cooperation. We responded with arrogance and dismissal. They offered to save us, and we chose pride over survival. If any learn from our mistakes, let them remember that the greatest strength is knowing when to accept the guidance of others. The communication panel chimed with Captain Brooks's voice. Rescue ship in position. Beginning emergency extraction now. Kate initiated the reactor overload sequence and sealed the recording in the bunker's final transmission array. As the survivors moved through the airlock into the waiting ship, she took one last look at the displays showing the dying planet above. The fusion reactor detonated just as their ship cleared the atmosphere, creating a brilliant flash that momentarily